Hello, Jessica. Hello, everyone. For those of you who had just joined, we're just waiting a few more minutes to see if other folks are going to jump on. It's just a few minutes after 12. We'll start maybe in about 1 or 2 minutes. Joining as we go to the lunch hour here. And I'll walk us through a bit of an introduction here. I did want to first welcome, of course, Dr. Dawn Richards to this presentation today. Dawn, it's so wonderful to have you back and nice to see you again. Dawn and I have chatted a few times before in the past about some of our patient-oriented research and is a wonderful wealth of resource in this field. So we're looking forward to hearing our chat today. Before I go into the actual discussion, I did want to acknowledge that the Waypoint Research Institute is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, which includes the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The Haudenosaunee, which includes the Six Nations, Mohawk, and the Wata community, Huron, Wendat, and Métis peoples. We wanted to acknowledge and affirm our commitment to improving the relationships between nations and to improving equity for Indigenous communities residing in the central north region of Ontario. And we also invite you, depending on where you're joining from today, to put in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining from. If you're unsure about which territory that is, there is a website out there called native-land.ca, and you can learn more about the traditional lands from which you're joining. Okay, a couple of reminders about our webinar series. This is the first one we've had in 2025, so welcome back. We had a bit of a break during the summer, and we offer them as a way of offering practical insights and implications for current research projects all across the spectrum of different kinds of research. We also run a complementary series called Waypoint Talks Building Your Toolkit, and it's an education series looking at best practices in research, quality improvement, and program evaluation. And so we really like to give sessions across different areas, different topics, different skill sets. And these sessions are open to anyone interested in learning about these skills across the country. So thank you for joining us today. If this is your first one, if this is not your first one, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. Imagine this stage into the virtual world. Most people are pretty familiar with the online world of Zoom, but I did want to remind folks that in the webinar series that we have here, you can use the chat box function to talk to fellow attendees, or you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. And feel free at any time to drop a question into the Q&A. And when Dawn has finished her presentation, we'll come back to those questions and we'll maybe go through them and we'll have an open dialogue if that's okay. You can also chat with your fellow attendees, as I said, in the chat box. And then we'll come back to questions at the end. I did want to remind folks this is recorded and all of these become available on our website after the event, and we keep them for future use and for future reference. And we will also send a survey out at the end, and I'll explain some of that as we get to it. And we also offer certificates of completion or participation for professional development. And again, at the end of the presentation, I'll give you some contact information for how we can go about that and keep you posted. Okay, so I did want to, again, thank you, Dawn, for joining us today. I met Dawn a few years ago. She helped us think through some of our patient-oriented work. And coincidentally, we are now getting our first clinical trial up and running that we've ever run at Waypoint. And Dawn has a wealth of experience in running clinical trials, but interesting for me too is the inclusive representation of patients in clinical trials and clinical research, which I think is so fundamental and a core piece of the work that we're trying to do at Waypoint here. So really, really glad to have you here. Before Dawn jumps in, I just did want to provide a little bio about Dawn. Dawn is the founder of the 502 Labs and the Director of Patient and Public Engagement at Clinical Trials Ontario. With a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Alberta and experience in a variety of roles in the past 20 years, it was her diagnosis with rheumatoid arthritis in 2006 that started her journey to combine her passion for science with making the most of her diagnosis. So in her role at CTO, Dawn is charged with executing on CTO's strategic pillar of patient and public engagement. Really, really cool stuff. So Dawn, we're really grateful to have you here today. And we'll come back at the end with some questions. Please take your time with your presentation. If you want to ask questions in between and engage the group, by all means, you can do that as well. And so over to you, Dawn, and we'll come back in a bit. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot, Christopher, for that warm welcome, and it's certainly nice to be here today. I think we've got a fairly small group, so super happy to take any questions you have along the way. When I share my slides, it's harder for me to keep an eye on the chat, but Christopher, maybe you can just see if there's anything there that makes sense to ask then, and feel free to just jump in there. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about the basics of clinical trials. And as Christopher said, my role at Clinical Trials Ontario is as the Director of Patient and Public Engagement. And we look at that two ways. We look at that one as helping people make informed decisions about their participation in clinical trials. And the second way we look at that engagement piece is helping people to be members of trial teams as like on the research team itself. My focus today is mostly going to be, I guess I'll say from a potential participant perspective, but if you're interested in being on a research team, this is probably also useful for you because it's kind of like a 101 about clinical trials and about setting the foundation for why we do trials, what they are, participant rights, all those kinds of good things. I guess I'll also start by acknowledging that I am a settler who lives, works, and plays in Toronto, which is also known as Treaty 13 territory and is the traditional lands and home place of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Chippewa people, and is home today to many different First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So I'm going to talk generally about what trials are. We get a lot of questions in the work I do about how people actually find trials. So depending on your role, that might be super useful for you. And then I'll talk about participating in or leaving a trial. So a bit about participant rights as well. And maybe if you wouldn't mind just putting the perspective that you're bringing to today's session in the chat, I will definitely just open it up and take a peek as you fill it in. It just helps me know a little bit about who you are as an audience and the perspective that you're bringing, or maybe something that you're interested in learning being part of today's session. So, as mentioned, I'm here today on behalf of an organization called Clinical Trials Ontario. CTO is what I'll refer to it as. It is primarily funded by the government of Ontario to basically help make Ontario a better place to do clinical trials. You can just think of it that way. We have three strategic priorities. One is to help streamline the processes to do clinical trials. There are a lot of steps and a lot of processes related to doing these highly regulated types of studies. And so helping people be able to focus on actually doing the research versus all of the paperwork, some might say bureaucracy, et cetera, to getting trials up and running is really important. So a lot of the work that we've done in Streamline is about streamlining the ethics approval system for clinical trials and multi-site trials, as well as observational studies in Ontario. The second is engage. So that's the pillar I primarily work in, and that's about engaging patients on clinical trial teams and initiatives, and also about helping potential participants make informed decisions about participating. That doesn't always mean participating either. The last strategic priority is this concept of promoting Ontario as a place to do trials. We have a really unique population. We have amazing research capacity here, and there's lots of opportunity to do trials in Ontario. A couple of other kind of, I'll say, exciting things is in the past year or so, Clinical Trials Ontario has received peer review funding to help better streamline the process of ethics review across Canada for multi-center trials as well. So taking what we've learned in streamlining the ethics processes in Ontario and seeing how we can implement something similar to that. It'll be a little bit different because of different legislations and regulations across the country. And the second thing that I wanted to mention is while we're in Ontario and I'm talking on behalf of CTO, everything that you'll hear in the presentation applies to trials across Canada. As you know, trials are federally regulated by Health Canada. So anything I'm going to talk about doesn't really matter where you are in the country, it's applicable. Really important in the work that I do at CTO also is that I work with a group that's called our College of Lived Experience. They are a group of individuals from across Ontario who have various experiences as either participants or caregivers to people who have participated in clinical trials. They may not have participated in a trial themselves, but they might just be interested in trials. They're interested in research, they're interested in health and healthcare policy. So everything that I do at CTO, I collaborate with the college, and the information that's part of this webinar is no different. All of the information that you see that I'll present has been collaboratively developed with the college, and a lot of the initiatives that CTO undertakes also engages the college. So really important for us to have the perspectives of people who have participated in trials or who are interested in participating in trials and see trials as a potential option to inform what's public facing on our website. So everything that I'll talk about comes from our website, which is laid out in a way, again, that our college has told us would be really helpful for people. So let's start with the basics of trials. They are a type of research. This is super important. Sometimes people who are contemplating being in trials don't understand that they're essentially participating in a form of research or in an experiment. They're set up and designed really specifically to help to test what we call health-related interventions and their outcomes. Interventions, just a fancy word to say treatment or therapy instead. And they're often designed to answer questions about the safety of a treatment, if it works better than what's already available, or maybe it even cures the condition or disease. Does it help people's quality of life? So those are really important aspects for us to be clear about in the trial space about clinical trials. And we often, I think, or maybe this is unfair, I often think about the things we test in clinical trials being done related to drugs, but there are lots of other things that we can test in clinical trials. So they might be things like devices, might be a new type of surgery, might be a change to radiation therapy. It might be, for example, an imaging or other diagnostic procedure. It might be things as simple as diet, exercise, lifestyle. So those might be studied on their own, or they might be studied in combination with others. That being said, I'm going to focus the talk on clinical trials for drugs because sometimes it's just easier to walk through that. But you can keep in mind that we can use trials as a way to study a bunch of different types of interventions. So again, clinical trials are done really purposefully. They provide data or evidence about the intervention that's being studied, and that data or evidence can actually be used by a number of different people and organizations to help us decide what therapies or other therapies might work best in people. So just to give you an idea about the different types of people that use the data that's generated by trials. Obviously, Health Canada uses it to make decisions about clinical trials. The provinces and territories and different decision makers might use the data from clinical trials to make decisions about what will be covered in a province or what can be on the formulary in a province. Patients will use trial data to think about maybe different treatments they're interested in. Healthcare providers will probably do the same, using the data from trials to make decisions. And clinical practice guidelines are largely based on data from clinical trials. The people running trials might decide based on the data whether or not they continue to carry that intervention and the studies around it forward. So a bunch of different people can make decisions based on clinical trial data. And I think sometimes we just kind of confine ourselves to it must be about the research team that's gathering the data, but there's lots of different people that can use that data in different ways to support the work that they're doing. So we're going to spend some time kind of walking you through the phases of clinical trials for drugs. And what I'm going to list here is kind of I guess, the basic structure of these trials for drugs. Again, it may depend on the area that you're studying as to how these different phases are designed and set up. So, for example, in the rare disease space, you may not have 20 to 80 people in phase one. Maybe there aren't that many people that it can be tested in. You might combine a couple of phases, again, because there's not a lot of participants. Sometimes in the oncology space, phase one studies are done with people who live with the condition that's being studied, which is generally not the case in other spaces. So we'll walk through this, but it's important for you to know that what these actually look like can change based on the area that's being studied, what the intervention is, et cetera. This will give you a general overview of what things really look like here. Also, really important to keep in mind that once things start in the clinical trial process, they may or may not move beyond a phase. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through each of these individual phases, why they're designed, what they look like. So let's start with phase one. This is sometimes called first in humans because this is literally the first time that the intervention has been tested in people. But it's really important to note that before something is tested in people, we often will have many years of data on this intervention at the molecular level, at the level of how it works. So, at the level of how it works in cells, potentially at the level of animals. So, how this is metabolized, how it's excreted, how it's absorbed, the pharmacokinetics of what it looks like in a different species. But until it goes into people, we don't really absolutely know how something is going to behave in people. So we got lots of data leading up to that. We've got enough that the regulator says that, you know, what the potential benefits should be should outweigh the potential risks. But again, until it goes into people, we don't know how an intervention is going to behave. So this is why phase one studies are done in a small number of people who are really closely monitored. Often they'll be brought on site and monitored really closely. And here the major aims are to establish that the intervention is in fact safe for people. Again, we'll have some idea about potential dose and side effect before it goes into people, but we'll learn more about dose and side effect profile once it does go into people. And I've mentioned before, small number of participants here because safety is paramount, and understanding what happens here will help determine the course of whether this intervention moves to another phase or if it doesn't move to another phase. And so let's just assume that our hypothetical intervention is deemed safe from the phase one data, and the side effect profile then looks all right for our sponsor to carry it on to the next phase. So phase two studies generally will be done in a larger number of people because we've established that this intervention is safe. Now what we're looking at is does the intervention do what it's supposed to do in people? So in phase one, sometimes you'll hear the participants called healthy participants, and they often will not live with the condition or um, what the intervention is supposed to impact. But in phase two, the volunteers in the study will live with the condition for which the intervention is intended to have an effect. So, as an example, for me, I live with rheumatoid arthritis. Phase one studies would not be done in people with rheumatoid arthritis. Phase two studies would be. So, does this thing do what it's supposed to do in people with the condition that it's supposed to impact? And again, researchers will continue to learn more about what the actual dose should be for people. And once this intervention goes into a larger number of people, we'll also understand more about side effects that might start to show up that weren't, for example, in the phase one studies. Or maybe there's no other additional side effects as well. So a larger number of participants here generally take a little bit longer to do. And we'll assume again that our hypothetical intervention has kind of met all of its endpoints for a phase two success story. And our sponsor decides that they want to take this into a phase three study. So phase three studies are often done in hundreds or thousands of individuals. Sometimes you will hear these called randomized control trials or RCTs. This is what a lot of people see as being the gold standard for providing evidence for an intervention. They're called randomized control trials because the participants here are assigned by chance to one of the interventions. So this is where you'll see a comparison done in phase three between interventions. Might be with a placebo or it might be a standard of care. I'm going to come back to talk about that a little bit later. Here, phase three studies, we're looking at how long do the effects of the intervention last. And just like in the previous two phases, we'll continue to learn more about dose. And again, as this intervention goes into a larger number of people, we may see side effects that we haven't seen as a research team before. So a large number of participants. And again, like I said, participants are randomized to whether they receive the intervention or they receive a comparator or whichever arm they're in. Sometimes there's more than there's more than one treatment arm. And sometimes the study participants are blind, so-called blinded to which arm of the trial they'll be in. And oftentimes, so is the research team. So if the research team is also blinded, it's called a double blind, a double blinded design, basically. So we assign people by chance to reduce bias. There's some other things that we do to reduce bias, and one of those is potentially use placebo, and we'll talk about that a little later. So in Canada, once the results of a phase three study are known, whoever the sponsor is, whether that's an individual investigator, whether that's a company, whatever that looks like, they can apply to Health Canada, our regulator, for approval so that the intervention can be widely marketed to people. So after phase three studies, that's where you'll just hear the term, this drug in our case is approved by Health Canada. And that means that it can be widely used by the population at that point. So there are phase four studies. They don't always happen, and they can happen in different ways. But this is once the intervention has been approved by a regulator to be used by a number of people, large numbers of people. And this is where we start to understand, again, if there are other longer term side effects that show up that haven't been seen in the clinical trials. And this phase is sometimes called post-marketing surveillance because now this drug, in our case, is widely available to the Canadian public that meet the criteria to take it. But it's gone into just this large number of people. And so different side effects might show up or longer term side effects because now it's being used by the general population that we've seen before. And there are some big cases where once people have been widely exposed to an intervention, that the regulators come back and made changes to the allowable dose or to who can actually receive the intervention based on some of the side effects and some of the things that have happened. So this happens based on as the intervention goes into larger numbers of people, and we can really see in the real world how things are looking. So very large numbers of participants can contribute to phase 4 studies, but important to know that phase 4 studies happen after the drug has been approved for widespread use. So I said I'd come back to the idea of placebo. We get a lot of questions from potential participants about the use of placebo and sometimes being scared that they could be randomly assigned to a placebo. So a placebo is an inactive therapy that does not have any effect on the condition. But it looks identical to the active therapy that's given to people. So if it's a drug, it looks exactly like the drug. No one would be able to tell the difference. If it's a device, again, it would look exactly like the device, but it wouldn't function at all. So it's not intended to have an effect on the condition studied. I'm sure you've all heard of the placebo effect, and yes, that's a real thing that can happen, but generally it doesn't happen for everyone, and so that's why placebos are used. And just like randomization, placebos are used to decrease bias in the results of studies. However, really importantly, that if there's a standard of care already widely available for a condition or a disease, a placebo would not be ethical to be used in a study. And so that would not be something that an ethics board would approve. And it shouldn't be a study that a credible scientific team would set up and put in front of an ethics review board either. So just important to know about placebo and how and why it's used and where it would be appropriate to use a placebo. So in the work that I do, we hear a lot from people about how do I find a clinical trial. Sometimes people rely on their healthcare providers, and depending on that individual that you see as a healthcare provider, they may or may not be really in the know about trials that are happening. And so we often just help people to understand where they can find trials, or as researchers, it's also useful for you to know where people are going to find studies that they can participate in. So one is healthcare providers. They can be a big source of information for some individuals. Some won't be as plugged in. So I think of sometimes family physicians are juggling a lot. They may or may not be as privy to what's going on in the trial side. And then I think about, for example, the oncology space, where lots of times trials are given as a potential option for people to explore, and especially at some of the larger academic centers. We get a lot of people too who ask health charities or patient organizations. They are often in the know about trials in their spaces, and people trust them as kind of groups that they go to for credible information, especially in the day and age we're living in. And CTO works with a number of health charities and patient organizations so that we can be sure that the information that they're providing is evidence-based and credible. Some people will contact hospitals or organizations that do research. I'm sure this will happen at Waypoint, that people know that you're an institution with a specialty and will come to you and ask about research. There are legitimate ads in newspaper, TV, radio. Those often tend to be for phase 1 studies where people are provided with compensation to participate and to take a little bit more of a risk with it being first in human to participate in those types of studies. And then a shameless plug for CTO's Clinical Trial Finder. But I will share with you that our Clinical Trial Finder pulls from a very well-known database called clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a place where a number of researchers will register their clinical trials. And they'll often do that because when they want to publish later about their clinical trials, the publishers will ask if they've registered their trial in an appropriate transparent database as well. So CTO's Clinical Trial Finder pulls from that particular database. It's not comprehensive, but there isn't one global database that covers all clinical trials. And we've made ours just a little bit easier to navigate than what clinicaltrials.gov looks like. We've currently made it open to trials in Canada, or you can set it up to look at trials in different regions for different disease or condition areas also. We also get a lot of questions from people about, okay, but I found this trial. Do I know that it's reputable or credible? And here's some of the advice that we give people. So the cost of the clinical trial should be covered for you, including study treatment. A really big red flag is if people are asking you to pay for the study treatment. You might have to pay for parking, obviously your time associated with participating in the study. Maybe you need to grab some food while you're at a site visit. So those kinds of small costs might be something that comes out of pocket, depends on the study. Sponsors can often cover parking if they're companies. But if you're asked for some kind of weird entrance fee or to cover the cost of the study treatment, that in itself is a red flag. The qualifications of the trial team. So you can take a look at who's running the study, can take a look at who the principal investigator is. Are they, have they been practicing in this area for a while? Have they, if you do a quick Google of them, do they show up in this area? Do they have publications in this area? Maybe they have affiliations with credible institutions. Those types of things would be important. In Canada, all clinical trials have to be reviewed and approved by Health Canada. And really, no trial team should feel like that's a wacky question. If they're asked that, they should be more than happy to respond to that. Same with responding to the question about if the clinical trial has been reviewed and approved by a research ethics board. Again, that shouldn't be looked at as a silly question if you're interested in participating. And then obviously the institution or the organization where the research is happening has liabilities associated with that research that they're willing to take on. And that organization will have reviewed and approved that clinical trial as well. So these are some ways that we ask people to kind of suss out clinical trials that they're interested in. And again, if it's a credible clinical trial, no one on the team should be dismissive of these types of questions, and they should be more than happy to answer any and all questions until people feel like they can understand the responses that have been provided and they feel okay with those. So even if all of these kind of meet your, okay, this trial looks reputable or credible to me, it's a really personal decision to actually participate in a study. So on top of all of those things, I'll just draw your attention to the bottom. And even if you're still interested in the trial after you've done all this type of homework, as a participant, you actually have to meet what's called the eligibility criteria to be in a trial. And you can kind of think of that as like the set of things that you need to meet or have in order to participate. So that might be that you need to be within a certain age range. It might be that you haven't used a certain type of medication before. It might mean that you have to live a certain distance from the study site for a number of reasons. So those are all things, again, that we tell people that if you're interested in participating, you're probably going to go through a number of steps to sort out whether you can actually participate and if it's what you feel is the right study for you. We also get asked a lot, is this my only option? And clinical trials are not the only option. Receiving no treatment may be an option. It might not be a great option, but it might be an option. Receiving a different treatment from a standard treatment or a treatment that you're on might be another option to talk to your healthcare provider about. You might participate in a research study that's not considered a clinical trial. Maybe that's another option for you. Or you might actually wait to see if a clinical trial that you're interested in comes closer to you or takes a different form. Maybe it's more decentralized, or maybe there's some hybrid components to it. So clinical trials aren't the only option for certain, but we've got your doctor here, but maybe that's your trusted circle. It could be other healthcare providers that you work with. It could be your friends and family too, to consider all the ramifications of these different options. We get questions too about, well, what if I can't find a trial and I'm really interested? So there might be opportunities for you to bring a trial closer to you if it's far away. And that might be a lot of work, but people have done it. Even if it's in a site that's not easy for you to get to, it's probably worth talking to the study team. Sometimes there can be travel arrangements that the sponsor can cover. Sometimes they can't. And for some people, those trials can still be options. Their out of pocket is going to look a lot different from somebody who just lives down the street. But it's worth having a conversation with someone about the possibilities. And then again, I've also heard of people just keeping a watch on the trials that are available close to them. And they will often see studies open in other places and then come to Canada as well. So maybe it just means, if you can, holding out for the right study for you, but there are lots of other options if you're interested in participating in research generally, may or may not be a clinical trial. We also get questions about, if my healthcare provider offers me a clinical trial, do I have to say yes? And the answer to that is no. So what your healthcare provider brings to you in terms of a clinical trial might be an option for you, and maybe you decide that that's not an option for you. And your relationship with them and your care that's provided to you should not change, no matter what you decide about a clinical trial. So a little bit about participant rights as we kind of head into the kind of final parts of the presentation. So I'm sure many of you have heard of this concept of informed consent. And I think a lot of people think about informed consent being something that happens at the start of the study, where you physically sign a form to be a volunteer in the study. That's one part of informed consent. And really, informed consent is a process that should continue to happen throughout your participation in a study. So, important things that tie into informed consent is that consent is voluntary. Consent can be withdrawn at any time. So, no matter when you change your mind about participating in a trial, that is your right, and that decision is up to you. And this idea that consent is an ongoing process throughout the trial. So, you should feel free as a participant to ask as many questions as you need to ask to feel informed about what your role and your responsibilities are in the trial. And if at any point you feel like it's time for you to leave the trial, again, that's an option for you. I'm going to talk a little bit too about, in the next slide, you can ask for things that you provided to the study to also be withdrawn from the study. And I'd encourage you to talk to the study team if you do make that decision to withdraw from a trial, because there might be things that you haven't considered to keep yourself safe in withdrawing from the study that the team will be able to help you with. The other thing is that really all potential benefits and risks for trials are different. It's really going to depend on what the intervention is, and it's going to depend on the study. So we can have a general idea of what some potential benefits and risks to people are, but really you'll have to look at that individually for the study that you're considering. I mentioned this before that participation is really personal. And so you're going to have to decide again, maybe you've got a circle of trusted people that you would bounce these conversations and these ideas off of, but really it boils down to you deciding if you feel that the potential benefits will outweigh the potential risks of participating in the study. That's going to be really different for everybody. Depends on their situation. It depends a lot on context. And what is known about potential benefits and risks for each specific trial will be available in the informed consent form. And again, really encourage you, if this is an option that you're thinking about, is to ask the study team lots about potential benefits and risks and other questions about the study too, until you feel satisfied that you've got the answers you need to make the decisions that you need to make. So I told you we'd come back a little bit to withdrawal, and a reminder that at any time you may decide to end your participation in a clinical trial. You don't need to provide a reason, but you might be expected that you'll be asked why you're making that decision, and you don't have to tell people, but you might be asked that. As I mentioned, I really encourage you to talk to the study staff or the physician to help you make that decision, to help you have any questions answered that you need to make that decision. And also, they might ask you some questions about your experiences being in the trial. And importantly, they might give you some instructions or have you do some tests or physical exams so that you can safely be stopped from participating any further. So those might be things that you don't necessarily think about, that it might be for your own safety to have some tests or exams before you fully withdraw from the trial. And as I mentioned, you might wish for any data you've provided to the study or any biological specimens you've provided to the study to be removed or destroyed. And that might be possible and it might not be possible, but the research team will be able to explain to you why it's possible or not. So again, encourage you, if that's how you feel about your data and anything that you've provided to the study team, to have that conversation with them about what's possible. That's pretty much it for me. So just another reminder that all of the information that I shared with you here is available on our website, and it's all been developed in collaboration with our College of Lived Experience. So people who have different experiences participating in studies. And I'll leave you with my email address. I'm always happy to be followed up with after the fact and to answer any questions that you might think of later on this afternoon or after you've learned a bit more about things. So with that, I'll put my email address into the chat and we'll see what kinds of questions people have for me here.
Okay, fantastic, Dawn. Thank you so much. So clear and amazingly presented. Thank you. There was one question that popped up probably halfway through when you were talking about placebo. I'm not sure if you're looking at it, but it is. I also work in an intensive care unit and had a patient mention they were participating in clinical trials and didn't know they were getting the medication or placebo. Do you provide a way for physicians to find out this information in emergency situations before the trial is over?
That's a really unique situation. So, that is a good question. Again, I'm not entirely sure about like the context of the trial, so I think it would be very, excuse me, very context dependent. And yeah, like so much of it would be if the trial is being run at the center that you're at, and there are rules and regulations around that. I think the short answer is I can't necessarily give you an answer because it's very context dependent. And there's all kinds of things with the state of where data and blinding, et cetera, are in different situations. So very hard for me to answer that question. It's a good question, but I'm sorry, Jeanette, I can't give you a lot of a good detailed response there.
Thank you, Don. Jeanette, do you have any follow-up questions for that you want to ask or drop in the chat? I would also open this up to the few folks who are on the call too, if you have any questions for Don or follow-up or thoughts and considerations. Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Any questions from the crew? So I have a couple. I have lots. We're just starting our first trial at Waypoint. We're doing an RTMS trial for smoking cessation. And I'm curious about, from the research side, perhaps, what are some of the main challenges that you see in the early days of starting a trial or in clinical trials research generally? What are some basic challenges that you think a new site might run into?
That's a great question, Christopher. I think one of the challenges that is it just continues to be a challenge, and this is well known for many, many years, is recruitment to studies. Recruitment not meeting its intended numbers is one of the major reasons that trials do not get completed, do not start up at some sites at all. And so I think being really realistic about what recruitment might look like is probably super important, I think. I think the other thing, now I'm not the expert on the operations side, but I'm going to give a plug for Health Canada because I've been in the space long enough. Sometimes people get really worried about Health Canada and their role in oversight and in site visits and all those kinds of things. But I can assure you that they're super, super open to supporting sites to do their roles that make sure that they are abiding by the regulations. There are also lots of great groups that are out there that have been in your so-called shoes before, and they're always happy to mentor other people that are newer to the space. So I will also I'll give a plug to the CTO community because I know people are always happy to be in contact with people that have questions about things that are they can provide maybe a little bit of information based on their own experiences. And then there is also an organization called N2 or the Network of Networks, and they do a lot of mentoring through their quality committee to help people and organizations actually prepare for Health Canada and other regulatory agency site visits. And they're also happy, I think, to answer any questions to people that are newer to the space about some of the nuances about doing trials. So part of it's on like that kind of operation side. There are lots of people and resources and tools that you can reach out to help you, set things up properly and, answer questions along the way, kind of like a mentorship sort of approach. And then, I think on the participant side too, I'm just super cognizant of the the sort of space that we're living in and all of the disinformation that's rampant right now. And so I kind of feel like for sites that are kind of just getting started, being really patient with people about the types of questions they might be asking, about their participation, and what their sort of rights and what their responsibilities in terms of participating would be. I think those are probably really important things for newer sites to be thoughtful and mindful about.
Fantastic. There's a few folks who are not on the call who are helping with the operational side of things. We have
Yes.
been meeting with them too, and we have been
Awesome.
developing for the last couple of years. But indeed, we're going to run into some of these operational glitches, recruitment glitches. I know that we
Yeah.
will. So I'll
Yeah.
share this with the team because I think they would be open to. I love the mentorship idea in particular, that we're not alone in this. There's other sites who have gone through something like this, and even folks on the team have done trials before. But it's a new site, requires a whole new orientation on some of our clinical teams and everything else. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see Jeanette's got another question about, so the can the patient be in touch with Health Canada at any time to ensure the trial is going according to guidelines? I mean, I don't think a lot of participants reach out to Health Canada. I think generally participants will ask the trial team any sorts of questions they have. On the informed consent form, there will also be information about how to reach out to the Research Ethics Board if you have any questions or concerns also about the trial. Those are probably the first places where participants would start. I generally don't see people going to Health Canada. That being said, this is slightly separate, but I want to share this with people, is that when things do come to market, there are ways that patients, individuals in society can actually report side effects to Health Canada directly. So physicians can report side effects, and the public can also report side effects. And that's also through that reporting how sometimes things change with respect to some drugs that have been on market, and then things change with respect to their dosing or who they are approved to be provided to because of some of those reporting things that happen after things become available and widely available market. So I just, it's a little bit different than what you asked, Jeanette. I don't often see participants, for example, talking to Health Canada with concerns. Usually you would go to the ethics board because that's the information you'll be given on the informed consent. But when things do become more widely available, I did want to make it clear that people can report side effects to Health Canada, and often their physicians will too. And that's how things become more known about how interventions work in, I'll say in real people, but in the real world with people who have lots of different conditions, not just the condition that's under study in the clinical trial itself. I hope that made sense.
Great. Thank you, Don. Any follow-up questions, Jeanette? Thank you for your questions, by the way. Okay, can I ask one follow-up question? And then maybe
Sure thing.
I'm interested in the patient engagement methodology and how that intersects with clinical trial research.
Yep.
So building trust, building safety, all the things that are important to participatory methods. How does that show up in your work at Clinical Trials Ontario? And what do you support in clinical research through your patient engagement lens?
So a couple of things. One is we will have in the next little while some additional resources on our website to help teams that are trying or who want to engage with patients or public members as partners on their trial teams. So that will become a little bit more widely available. One thing I can share with you is, and I didn't share earlier on, is that the work that we do with the College of Lived Experience, I mostly showed our internal work, but we've also brought external researchers and organizations in to work with the college on their own external projects. And so we've done this in more than one case in different areas. So one, for example, was a group that was developing kind of like a new procedure for people who are coming into their phase 1 clinical trial unit. They were going to develop some videos about this different steps you go through, who you'll see, what it looks like. And so they brought their ideas for a script to the College of Lived Experience. And we had a couple of good sessions with the college about, I think, I think you should change things to be this way. Is this what you mean? Maybe exploring it this way might make more sense. And so they provided their own input to this team because this particular team did not have an easy way to access some of their own um, participants or patient partners. So we've done that. We've also done it where they've looked at consent forms, also global consent forms, and where they've provided some information too about concepts related to future data use. So this is kind of big in the trial space about in consents, we consent to use the data specifically for the trial, but maybe down the road we'll have some other ways that we might want to look at the data. And so we had this whole conversation with our college about their thoughts related to that. And then their research team went and made some changes and they shared in both those cases, the team shared back with the college how their input was used in the products that they went and continued to develop. So that's like an open invitation. We're happy for people to work with the college. If they don't have that kind of go-to group that they can work with on their own clinical trials initiatives as well.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll watch for those future resources that you said as well.
For sure.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions in the chat, Dawn, do you have any parting words of wisdom before I flash up a slide here and give some information? Anything else that you wish that you had said?
Um, I think the big thing is just to ask lots of questions, right? I think that's really important for people is if you're really interested in a trial, reach out to the trial team. They're happy to talk to people about their work. They're happy to answer questions that people have. And the key is to just be really informed when you make your decision. Maybe a clinical trial isn't right for you at a certain point, or maybe it is, but that's not really a decision that anyone else can make. And as long as we can help provide credible and trustworthy and evidence-based information to you to help you make that decision, then that's a great start for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dawn. Really appreciate it. Okay, I think most people would know this if you've attended before, but I did want to just close by saying that for folks who are not here, or if you want to send it to some colleagues, these will be posted on our website, and we encourage you to share it. And Dawn, I will share this with, as I said, with a couple of folks on our administration team who couldn't be here, and other folks in the hospital who could really use some of the information you shared today. So thank you very much for that. I also want to remind folks that we do send a survey out, and we really do appreciate feedback on how this went, topics for future discussion, how we can improve this Waypoint talk series. So thank you very much for filling that out. And there's some contact information from our KT coordinator, Christy Allen. If you would like a certificate of completion, please reach out to her. She is on leave for a couple weeks, but she will respond when she's back. So thank you very much for that. And I think that's it today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We fit it in just over an hour over the lunch hour. And Dawn, thank you for taking time out of your day and your busy schedule to do this. We really, really do appreciate it. Extremely timely topic for our hospital. So thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.